The flower shop was Mariah's favorite place in the whole city. To anyone else, it might have just been a small store tucked between a noisy restaurant and a tall office building, but to her, it was a world of its own. The air was always thick with the sweet smell of roses, the earthy scent of soil, and the sharp, clean fragrance of lilies. Bunches of flowers in every color imaginable stood in buckets of water, waiting for someone to take them home. Mariah loved the quiet hum of the refrigerator where the most delicate flowers were kept, and the soft sound of snipping stems. She was arranging a bouquet of sunflowers, her dark hands moving gently among the bright yellow petals, when the little bell above the door chimed. But this chime sounded different, heavier, as if the door itself was nervous. The usual calm of the shop vanished in an instant. A group of men walked in, not one or two, but 5. They were all dressed in sharp, dark suits that fit them perfectly. They did not smile or speak to each other. They simply moved inside and stood like silent statues, their eyes scanning the small shop as if looking for danger. The other customer, a woman looking at daisies, suddenly put her purse closer to her body and quickly left without buying anything. The manager, Mr. Finn, who was usually joking around, stopped smiling and stood up very straight behind the counter. And then Mariah saw him, the man who was clearly the leader. He stepped forward from his group of men. His name was Jae-won. He was not the tallest man, but he carried himself in a way that made him seem like the most important person in the room. His black hair was neat, and his face was handsome but very serious, like a stone statue. His eyes were dark and intense, and when they slowly moved around the shop, they seemed to take in every tiny detail. When his gaze landed on Mr. Finn, the manager gave a small, nervous bow of his head. Jae-won's voice was low and calm when he spoke. "I need an arrangement," he said. "For my mother. It is her birthday." He explained the colors she liked and the types of flowers that were her favorite. Mr. Finn nodded eagerly, his hands fluttering, and immediately turned to Mariah. "Mariah, our best arranger will help you. She will make something perfect." Mariah felt her heart do a little flip. She put down her sunflowers and wiped her hands on her green apron. She could feel the eyes of all the men on her. Walking to the cooler where the special flowers were kept, she tried to act normal, but the air felt thick and hard to breathe. She selected white orchids, pale pink peonies, and some soft green leaves. As she carried them carefully back to her work table, she had to walk past the group of men. One of them, a larger man with a sharp suit, was shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Just as Mariah passed, he turned to say something to the man next to him. It happened in a slow-motion blur. The man's elbow, moving as he turned, bumped hard into a small, round table where a single elegant vase stood. The vase, filled with water and a single red rose, wobbled violently. For a second, it seemed it might settle back down, but then it tipped over the edge. Time seemed to slow as it fell, spilling cold water all over Mariah's legs before shattering on the floor with a loud, shocking crash. The sound of the breaking glass seemed to freeze everyone in the shop. Water soaked through Mariah's jeans, feeling icy cold against her skin. The red rose lay sadly on the wet floor among the shiny pieces of glass. The large man who had caused the accident looked startled for a moment, but then his face hardened. He didn't look at the mess he made. Instead, he pointed a finger at Mariah. "You," he said, his voice rough. "You weren't watching where you were going. You are so clumsy." All the men turned to look at her, and then Jae-won turned. His dark eyes moved from the broken vase on the floor, up past her wet jeans, and finally settled on her face. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool judgment. There was no kindness in that look, only a quiet, waiting intensity. It was a look that demanded an answer. It was a look that usually made people tremble and apologize for things they didn't even do. Mariah's heart was now pounding like a drum in her chest. She felt a hot flush of anger mix with her fear. It wasn't fair. She had done nothing wrong. She saw Mr. Finn wringing his hands, looking like he was about to tell her to just clean it up and not make a scene. She saw the smug look on the large man's face. Sure, he would not be challenged. But most of all, she felt the weight of Jae-won's stare. It was like a physical pressure. She took a deep, shaky breath. She forced her shoulders to straighten and her chin to lift. She ignored everyone else in the room and locked her eyes directly with Jae-won's. Her own brown eyes, usually warm and smiling, now flashed with a fire that surprised even her. The shop was so quiet you could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Her voice, clear and firm, cut through the silence. "Keep looking at me," she said to Jae-won, not blinking, not backing down. "I'm not to blame for what happens between your legs." For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. The large man gasped. Mr. Finn looked like he might faint. The other men stared in utter shock, waiting for their boss to explode in anger. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Jae-won that way. But Jae-won did not get angry. He did not shout. His stone-like face did something completely unexpected. One of his eyebrows twitched, just a little, and then the very corner of his mouth curled upward. It wasn't a big smile, not even a small one, really. It was just a tiny, faint hint of a curve, a crack in the stone. It was there for a second, and then it was gone. But Mariah saw it. She had surprised him. She had intrigued him. He gave a single, slow nod, his eyes still glued to hers. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a wallet, and placed several large bills on the counter, more than enough to pay for the flowers and 100 vases. "For the flowers," he said, his voice still low, but now with a new, different tone. "And the trouble." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the shop, his men quickly following him, the large man shooting a confused look back at Mariah. The bell on the door chimed again. The shop was silent once more, but the air was now charged with something new, something electric. Mr. Finn let out a huge sigh of relief and started mopping up the water. Mariah stood still, her legs still wet, her heart still racing. She could still feel the intensity of Jae-won's gaze, and she knew, without a doubt, that this was not the last time she would see him. The days following the incident in the flower shop settled into a new, strange rhythm for Mariah. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a low, steady hum of curiosity that lived in the back of her mind. She went through her usual motions, unpacking new shipments of flowers, trimming thorny stems, crafting bouquets for birthdays and apologies. But a part of her was always waiting, listening for the specific sound of the door opening that had now become etched in her memory. Mr. Finn had, at first, been nervously overprotective, jumping at every customer and constantly asking if she was all right. But as a week passed with no sign of the serious man in the suit, the shop slowly began to feel normal again. The sweet, safe smell of flowers once again overpowered the lingering scent of tension. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, when the sun was streaming lazily through the front window, that the familiar shadow fell across the floor. Jae-won entered alone this time, without his wall of silent men. The absence of his group made his presence somehow more powerful, more focused. He was dressed more casually in dark trousers and a simple, well-fitting sweater, but his posture was just as rigid, his eyes just as intense. Mr. Finn, who had been whistling, abruptly stopped and busied himself in the back room, giving them a wide berth. Jae-won walked directly to Mariah's work table, where she was tying a ribbon around a bundle of lavender. "The flowers were a success," he stated, his voice a low rumble that was not quite soft, but was no longer a command. "My mother was very pleased." Mariah's fingers stilled on the ribbon. She looked up, meeting his gaze. The memory of their last encounter flashed between them, a silent, shared secret. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mothers deserve to feel special on their birthdays." He gave a single, short nod, his eyes drifting from her face to the lavender in her hands. "She said they were the most beautiful she's ever received." He paused, as if considering his next words carefully. "I require another arrangement. For my office, it is too sterile." And so it began. He became a regular visitor, his appearances never announced but always expected. At first, his requests were simple and his visits brief. He would order a arrangement for his office, then one for his lobby, then another for a business partner. He always insisted that Mario be the one to create them. He would stand near her table, a silent observer, as she selected blossoms and arranged them with a practiced, gentle touch. He didn't speak much, but his attention was a physical weight, a focused energy that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Slowly, over the course of several weeks, the wall between them began to develop tiny, hairline fractures. It started with small questions. "Why those colors together?" he asked one day, watching her combine orange tulips and deep blue irises. "Because they're brave," Mario answered, without looking up, her hands deep in the foliage. "Blue is calm and steady, but orange is full of fire and life. They aren't afraid to stand next to each other." He was silent for a long moment. "I see," he said, and it sounded like he truly did. Another time he asked about her art. He had noticed the small, quick sketches of flowers she sometimes doodled on the edges of her order forms. "You draw?" he said, not as a question, but as a confirmed fact. "It's a dream," she confessed, feeling a little shy under his direct gaze. "Someday I want to have my own gallery, not just for flowers, but for paintings and sculptures too. A place that feels like this shop, full of beautiful things that make people feel something." He listened, his head tilted, as if her dream was a complex business proposal he was evaluating. "A gallery requires a good location," he mused, almost to himself. "And a strong business plan." These small exchanges became the foundation of something new. The fear Mario had initially felt had completely melted away, replaced by a deep and growing curiosity. She began to see past the powerful boss. She noticed the faint shadows of tiredness under his eyes, the way he would sometimes pinch the bridge of his nose as if warding off a headache. She saw the way he always spoke of his mother with a tone of unwavering respect. He was a man who carried heavy things, and he carried them alone. One evening, as the shop was about to close and the streetlights outside began to glow with a soft orange light, Jae-won arrived. The shop was empty, and Mr. Finn had already left for the day, leaving Mario to lock up. Jae-won stood just inside the door, his hands in his pockets. "The large arrangement in my office," he began, his voice unusually quiet. "It needs refreshing. Could you bring a new one tomorrow evening? To my office. I will be working late." The request felt different. It was no longer a public transaction in the safety of her flower shop. It was an invitation into his world. Mario felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, but she also felt a pull, a desire to see where he spent his time, to understand more of the puzzle that was Jae-won. She agreed. The following evening, she found herself standing in front of a tall, sleek office building in the heart of the business district. A security guard, who seemed to be expecting her, nodded her toward a private elevator that opened directly into Jae-won's office. The room was immense, with a wall of windows showing a breathtaking view of the city's glittering skyline. It was furnished with expensive, minimalist furniture, all dark wood and cool metal. It was, as he had said, sterile. Beautiful, but cold. The only spot of true life was the large flower arrangement she had made for him the week before, sitting proudly on a side table. Jae-won was standing by the window, his back to her, silhouetted against the city lights. He turned when he heard her enter. He had taken off his suit jacket and tie, and the top button of his white shirt was undone. He looked more like a man and less like a statue. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was soft, devoid of its usual businesslike edge. Morayo placed the new arrangement, a vibrant mix of red and gold chrysanthemums, on his desk. "It's very quiet up here," she remarked, looking around the vast, silent room. "It is," he agreed, walking toward her. "It is the quietest place I know. Sometimes it is too quiet." He stopped a few feet from her, his dark eyes searching her face. "The people in my world, they look at me and they see my title. They see what I can do for them, or what I can do to them. They are either asking for things, or they are afraid." He paused, his gaze intense and unwavering. "But you, Morayo, that day in the shop, you looked at me, and you saw only a man who was being unfair, and you were not afraid to tell him so." The air in the room grew thick and warm. The hum of the city below was a distant whisper. Morayo could feel her pulse beating a quick rhythm in her wrists. He took one step closer, then another, closing the small space between them until she could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap. "No one has ever looked at me the way you do," he whispered, his voice barely audible. This was the moment the world shifted. This was the spicy electric moment that changed everything. He reached out, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His fingers, which she had only ever seen holding a pen or resting stiffly at his side, were surprisingly gentle as they brushed a stray curl from her cheek. The touch was light, but it sent a wave of warmth cascading through her entire body, making her skin tingle. She did not pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a second. He leaned in, his head tilting, and his lips met hers. It was not a rough or demanding kiss. It was soft, and slow, and incredibly warm. It started as a gentle pressure, a question, and when she answered by kissing him back, it deepened. It was a kiss full of unspoken things, of loneliness understood, of bravery admired, of a connection that had been growing silently in a flower shop for weeks. It felt like a secret and a promise all at once. When they finally parted, both of them were breathing a little faster. The sterile office no longer felt cold. It felt charged with a new, thrilling energy. They stood there, in the glow of the city lights, knowing that something had just begun, and that nothing would ever be the same again. The world after the kiss was not a simple one. For Morayo, the days were painted in brighter colors, the air smelled sweeter, and every ring of the shop bell carried the thrilling possibility of it being him. Jaewon, in his own way, began to shed the cold exterior he wore like armor. He no longer just visited the flower shop. He would pick her up after work, taking her to quiet, hidden restaurants where they could talk for hours. He told her about the heavy pressures of his family's business, the constant weight of decision-making, and the loneliness that came from a life where trust was a rare and fragile commodity. Morayo, in turn, shared her dreams of her gallery, sketching ideas on napkins, her voice filled with a passion that he listened to with rapt attention. Their love was a secret garden, lush and beautiful, growing fiercely in the spaces they carved out for each other away from the watching world. But no garden, no matter how hidden, is completely safe from storms. In Jaewon's world, there was a man named Minho. Minho had been with the organization for years, a loyal soldier who believed he deserved more power, more respect. He had watched Jaewon's sudden uncharacteristic softness with a growing poisonous jealousy. He saw the way Jaewon's eyes would glance at the clock before leaving the office, the slight, almost imperceptible smile that sometimes played on his lips. Minho saw Morayo not as a person, but as a weakness, a crack in his boss's formidable armor that he could exploit. One evening, as Morayo was walking home from the shop, A long shadow fell across her path. Minho stepped out from an alleyway, blocking her route. He was not physically threatening, but his presence was like a sudden drop in temperature. "You are the flower girl," he said, his voice slick and unpleasant. "You think you are special? You are a distraction. A pretty little hobby for a man who has real work to do. You live in a world of sunshine and petals. His world is one of shadows. You don't belong in it, and you will get hurt." His words were not a shout, but a venomous whisper designed to seep into her mind and plant seeds of fear. He didn't touch her, but the intent was clear. It was a warning, a message sent to shake her, to make her doubt the world she and Jae-won were building. Mariah stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. She said nothing, meeting his cold stare until he finally smirked and walked away, melting back into the shadows from which he came. The walk home felt infinitely longer, the familiar streets now seeming menacing. That night, when Jae-won called her, he heard the tightness in her voice immediately. "What is wrong?" he asked, his tone shifting in an instant from soft to sharp. She told him everything, her voice trembling slightly as she relayed Minho's words. The silence on the other end of the phone was profound and terrifying. It was not an empty silence, but a gathering storm. "Stay inside, lock your door. I will call you back," he said, his voice so low and cold it was almost unrecognizable. The line went dead. What happened next, Mariah would only learn in pieces later. Jae-won did not yell or make a public scene. He summoned a meeting of his most trusted men, Minho among them. In that quiet, tense room, Jae-won's fury was not a wild fire, but a controlled, glacial force. He laid out his evidence, his voice dangerously calm. He looked directly at Minho and declared, his words falling like stones, "You approached what is mine. You spoke to her with disrespect. You sought to frighten her. That is a failure of loyalty and a failure of judgment." The punishment was swift and severe. Minho was stripped of his position and his privileges, exiled from the inner circle, and sent to perform the most meaningless, low-level tasks in a distant part of the city. It was a message to everyone. Mariah was under his absolute protection. To touch her was to invite ruin. An hour later, Jae-won was at her door. He looked tired, the weight of his world heavy on his shoulders, but his eyes burned with a fierce, determined light. He stepped inside and took her hands in his. "I am sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My world. It can be dark. It can be dangerous. There are shadows that I have to live with, but I need you to understand this, Mariah. My love for you is the safest thing I know. It is the only thing that feels truly real to me. I will spend every day of my life making sure that no shadow ever touches you again." Mariah looked up at him, at this powerful, complicated man who was offering her his heart, flaws and all. She saw not a scary boss, but a man who was afraid of losing the one good thing that had happened to him. Her fear melted away, replaced by a certainty that felt as solid as the earth beneath her feet. She squeezed his hands. "I'm not afraid when I'm with you, Jae-won," she said firmly. "I love all of you. I love the strong leader, and I love the man who gets quiet when he's tired. Your world has shadows, but it also has you, and you are my light." Weeks turned into months, and their secret garden began to bloom in the open. Jae-won introduced her to his mother, a kind-eyed woman who hugged Mariah tightly and whispered, "You make him happy. I have not seen him this happy in years." It was the final seal of approval, the merging of his two worlds. One evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange, purple, and gold, Jae-won took her to the same quiet hill where they had sometimes gone to watch the city lights awaken. But this time it was different. A soft blanket was laid out, and the very same flowers from their first meeting, white orchids and pale pink peonies, were arranged in a small basket. As they sat, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jaewon turned to her. His usual seriousness was there, but it was filled with a profound, overwhelming love. "Moreo," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "You walked into my life and you were not afraid. You saw the man behind the title. You brought color and light and fragrance into a world that was gray and silent. My life before you was a list of duties. My life with you is a story I want to read forever." He reached into his pocket and got down on one knee. In his hand was a small, velvet box. Inside was not a large, flashy diamond, but a beautiful, unique ring with a deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny, sparkling stones. It was brave and beautiful, just like her. "You are my forever. Will you marry me?" Tears of pure joy welled in Moreo's eyes, catching the light of the setting sun. There was not a single moment of hesitation. "Yes," she breathed, her voice cracking with happiness. "Yes, Jaewon, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. He stood and pulled her into his arms, and their kiss was not a secret, stolen moment, but a promise spoken against each other's lips, a vow sealed under the vast, darkening sky. It was a kiss that held their entire journey, the spilled water, the challenging words, the gentle conversations, the electric first kiss, the faced fears, and now, this forever beginning. They held each other as the stars emerged, knowing that their love story, born from defiance and nurtured in secret, was now a brilliant, unending light for all the world to see. Did their journey capture your heart? If you want to discover more unforgettable stories of love that conquers all, make sure to subscribe for more. New chapters of romance and adventure are always waiting to be shared.